Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, and in this video we're going to go over the ignition weapons guide I just published on my website. In this guide you will find a lot of general information on what ignition weapons are, how you obtain them, how to upgrade them, and then we have a very important section that is the stats you should look for in ignition weapons, and this will also be the focus of this video. And then we have the last section with how the rerolling system works. I'm not going to cover that in this video because I already made one like 1 week and something ago, and you can refer to that if you're curious about it. But yeah, that's going to be the focus of this video. I'm going to maybe quickly go through the first 3 sections, even though I think it's stuff that most people already know. So like that the ignition weapons are additional equipment you can give to a unit once you unlock the carrier. To unlock the carrier, you need to get the exclusive equipment to plus 20, and then you can spend like 100 soul crystals to unlock this carrier here, and you will have 5 additional slots. In these 5 slots, you can wear some ignition weapons. When you have 2 pieces of the same ignition weapon, you get a 2 set effect. When you have 4, you get a 4 set effect. So far, I would say pretty simple. Every ignition weapon has one of 3 rarities, C, B, or A, and C and B are basically worthless. You don't even want to upgrade them. If you get them, you just destroy them or dismantle them. Kind of depends on what you need at the moment. And yeah, while I was saying that, as you can see, we have my Irang here that has 3 B rank pieces. The reason for that is I don't really care about the stats that she's getting. All I care about is having the 4 set effect of Bari. That's all I care about. So whether it's a C, B, or A rank has very little relevance here. So that's why, but never, ever, ever upgrade a B rank or C rank piece. That's really, really important. So we're going to focus mainly on A rank pieces. You will never see also in the guide information of how much XP you need to level up a B rank piece or which kind of stats they give. We don't give a shit, okay? Like, it's totally irrelevant. So an A rank piece can start with 3 substats or 4. That's it. It cannot start with 2, and there are no 5 substats. It's only 3 or 4. With a rolling system being a thing, everything that starts with 3 substats is basically worthless because rerolling an ignition weapon will allow you to redistribute the upgrades that the substats will get. We're going to go through that in the upgrading section, but it is really important to note that, again, everything that has 3 starting substats is kind of trash. So you can easily destroy those as well, unless you just need them for the side effect like I'm doing here. So in that case, it doesn't matter. And another important thing to note is that slot 1 will always have a main stat that is attack percent. That's fixed, it will never change. Slot 2 will always have defense percent. Again, fixed, it will never change. And slot 3 will always have HP percent. Slot 4 and 5 are a bit different. As you can see here from the guide, I have a list of possible stats that you can roll there as a main stat. And for slot 4, we have magic resistance effect, hit, crit damage increase, crit damage reduction. For slot 5, we have physical resistance, physical pierce, magic pierce, critical hit rate, and critical hit resistance. So those are the stats you can roll. Pretty simple and straightforward. We're going to see in the how to obtain the ignition weapon section that slot 4 and 5 have an additional like peculiarity, or however you want to call it. So they're very different because they also have a lower drop rate. Okay, I'm already saying it now. It doesn't really matter. Another important thing to note is that 2 stats cannot appear, like 2 of the same stat cannot appear on the same piece. So in this case, if we have an attack percent main stat, attack percent will never appear in the substat. And here we have critical hit rate main stat, it will never appear in the substats. That's it. Now, how you obtain ignition weapons is very, very simple. You go in the Expedition tab, and then you click to Secret Floor. And here you will see 7, I believe. Yeah, 7 secret floors. Every one of them will drop one of the 2 featured ignition weapons. And when we click here, we see that we have restraints, but okay, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to talk about that here. We also see that we have a rate up banner here. Now it's on every single like secret floor because there is an event running at the moment. But normally every week there is one of them that is in rate up and is on a rotation. So every week is going to change to the next one. And when there is a rate up, the chance of dropping an A rank piece will go from 20% to 30%. So that's quite the increase. That's really, really good. And you definitely want to use your master keys, this object here, only when there is a rate up. You don't want to waste them when there is no rate up whatsoever. You also have 3 free clears every day, so you can again clear whatever you need every day up to 3 times, and anything more than that will consume a master key. That's just how it is, nothing much to say. The second way to obtain ignition weapon, well, to be honest, there are also other ways, like there are some ignition weapon boxes that you can drop in some events or something, but it doesn't matter, those are okay. A bit odd maybe. The other main way to obtain ignition weapons is the fusion feature that we have here. Here you can just select any piece you want to fuse. So let's say I don't have any slot 4 for Rafflesia. I select it, and then I can destroy 3 A rank ignition weapons to get one of these. It is important that you only fuse for slot 4 and 5. Because I didn't show it, but slot 4 and 5 have a way lower percentage to drop compared to the other ones. It's actually just half, I would say. If we go here, auto clear, we click on rates, we see 3.9%. Now it's a bit more than half, no, actually a bit less than half, but okay. And then we have a 1.65% for slot 4 and 5. But on top of that, slot 4 and 5 will also have a randomized main stat. So getting the one you want is even harder. So it's normally recommended you only fuse for slot 4 and 5. But okay, that's enough also on how you obtain them. In terms of how you upgrade ignition weapons, well, first we have to say that every ignition weapon that is A rank can go from +0 to +20, and every 4 levels you will unlock one of these prism or whatever figure that is, diamond, okay? And it will upgrade a substat that this piece has. And basically upgrade is an additional roll, as simple as that. Every roll can have one of 4 values. So we have a low roll, mid-low roll, mid-high, and high roll. That's just how I decided to call them, but it doesn't really matter. It's not too important which one they start with, because again, we have the rerolling system that will randomize that as well. So it's kind of irrelevant what they start with. It is important that they start with 4 stats and that all 4 are of the stat that you want. That's as simple as that. If they start with 3 stats at +4, instead of an upgrade, you will get an additional stat to get to 4, and then you will only have a total of 4 upgrades, which is why, again, pieces that start with 3 stats are kind of worthless at the moment. Then we have also the main stat that is going to increase. Here we have a table with the possible values. We're not really going to talk about that point. We also have a table here with the amount of XP that the different items give. So when we try to announce a piece, we have 2 options. Either we feed an ignition weapon of the same slot. So in this case, it's slot 1. I can only feed ignition weapons of slot 1. So there is no slot 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's only, again, slot 1. And for this reason, it's also recommendable that you keep these universal items that are the Shinsu-C whetstones for slot 4 and 5 if possible, because as we saw before, you have a lower drop rate of those, and for that reason you will have lower XP coming from the ignition weapon pieces. So that's just how you upgrade it. You see here how much XP you need, and also for that reason it's normally recommendable maybe to stop at like +12 or +16 instead of going all the way to +20, because the stat increase will be pretty much linear, but the actual cost of upgrading is not really linear, it's more like exponential. So definitely it's better to stop a bit earlier, but on more units, as compared to having fewer sets upgraded. You can do fewer sets upgraded if you then decide to create presets and move sets around on your units, but that's probably more of a thing of the past. I don't know. Since the release of Bari, that's kind of never been useful that much, at least to me, but okay. So just know there is also that feature that you can leverage. And for upgrades, I think that's more than enough. We're going to now talk about the core of this video. So the stats that you should look for in an ignition weapon piece. And the first part of the guide will just go through a few key factors that you have to keep in mind. So the first one being your deficit. I get always the question, what is deficit? And it's very simple. You take the link level of the enemy and then you subtract your highest link. So if the enemy is 1000 and your highest link is 800, that is 200 deficit. As simple as that. There is really nothing fancy to it. And if the deficit is like around 300, then resistances will stop working. It's not a precise threshold. It will never be. It will highly depend on, well, times the unit, but that's out of the scope here. But it will also depend on your archive. So if you have a good archive that will give you a lot of attack, HP, and defense, then this threshold could be moved a bit higher, like 320, 350. If your archive is really bad, maybe it could be even lower, like 250 or something. But it is around 300 normally. So you can just refer to that. But as you see that your units that already have maxed out resistances are still getting one-shotted, then that means your deficit is too high for resistance to work, and it's time to drop them, basically. So that's one point. The second point that is also extremely important is which kind of scaling your DPS has. So is most of your damage on an attack scaling skill, or are there skills scaling on the enemy max HP? These are the two types of DPS that we have in the game at the moment. If a unit scales off of attack percent for the most part, then they will be influenced by the enemy defense, by the enemy resistances, and they will benefit from pierce and crits. That's it. If the scaling is on the enemy max HP, all of that doesn't matter. Defense, it's irrelevant. Resistances are irrelevant. Pierce, it's irrelevant. Crit, max HP damage cannot crit. So if your DPS unit is relying on max HP damage to do most of their damage, then you don't need to build offensive stats at all. They don't do anything. That's really, really important to note. There is a way to reduce the max HP damage on the enemies, and that's just a thing called damage taken reduction. A few units have that on their kits. You will find them out for sure, like Kunran or Awakened Drak. But okay, doesn't really matter. Also, Yama has it. But okay, that's out of the scope here. So that's one really important thing to note. Another one is the range of the attacks. So if your unit is close range, maybe you have to build some more defensive stats. If your unit is range, maybe with just positioning, you can get away with going full offensive. That kind of depends, but that's just a general thing to keep in mind. And then we have another important thing, and that is your unit reliant on debuffs and status effects? If they are, like they have a very long stun that you want to hit, or they have a very crucial debuff that they have to hit, like for example, I don't know, color specific elemental resistance decrease, that's a really important debuff to have, or like swiftness decrease, that's really important. Or if they have a very massive defense decrease that you want to land, then affected will probably help. And we're going to go in more detail later. But yeah, that's another thing to keep in mind. So what has my unit, like what does my unit have in the kit, and what do I need to actually land? So that's important. Another important thing is which kind of stats you have in the archive. And the archive will give you some different things. Let me just open it up. You will find that mine is very bad, but this is my free-to-play account. So here we have accuracy and evasion. Evasion, if it is lower than, let's say, 700 to 800, I wouldn't even consider evasion as a possible build because you cannot really consistently have higher evasion than the enemy accuracy. And if you don't have that, any point of evasion is completely irrelevant. Accuracy is also kind of important, but a bit less because they nerfed it a lot in the normal adventure, so you don't have to worry about it too much. You will still land your attacks on most units. But it's still something to keep in mind as well. And yeah, also HP, attack, and defense are kind of important for the resistance that was mentioned before, but again, we don't really have to talk about that point that much. Another key important things are that some units might have some specific stats that they need to properly function. An example might be like Yugo. She definitely wants effect resistance here instead of crit damage, because if she's interrupted, if she's stunned, and if she cannot cast her like active skill and special move, then she's in a bad spot and she might have the shield expire and then she might be dead. So you definitely want that effect resistance. It's really, really important on her, but it might not be the case on other close range DPS units, like maybe a white, for example. And also another very important thing is that I don't talk about PvP. I'm not taking PvP into account. I'm not well enough for PvP, so I don't even bother to try and understand it. If you're looking for PvP stuff, I don't know, ask somebody else, guys. I really don't know what to tell you. You can try to ask me, I can try to ask some people I know, but I really don't know. And if you're not a whale, don't even try to understand. It's really not good. It's really not good. But okay, enough of that. Now here we have a table that I decided to structure in a certain way. So we have the unit type that we're analyzing here in the first column. Then we have a below 300 deficit column, and above 300 with low archive evasion, and an above 300 with high archive evasion. So these are the three categories that we're going to consider. I did not make the distinction for the below 300 deficit because at that point, I don't really recommend building evasion in general. You can just go with resistances and it's fine. So I didn't even bother making the distinction here. In terms of the unit types, we have attack scaling DPS that is close range, attack scaling DPS that is ranged, max HP scaling DPS. Here, I didn't make a distinction between close range and ranged, mainly because they still want to run defensive stats regardless. So it's irrelevant if they're close range or ranged, they build the same stuff. Then we have stall tank, utility tank, support, the buffer, crowd control. So I divided supports into types. One is buffer only, which means you don't care if they don't land effects on the enemies, or maybe they don't even have them in their kits. What you care about is that they're going to buff your team. And for that, you don't need accuracy, you don't need effect hit, you don't need any of that. And if a support is a debuffer and crowd controller, you definitely need them to hit the enemies and land those crowd controls and those debuffs. So those are the two types of supports. So yeah, that's the different categories that I identified. There could be more. We could maybe synthesize a few of them in the same one, sure, but I figured this one was reasonable enough. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this. I would say we can quickly go through all of them, and that should be more or less it then. I don't know, we'll see. So for the first one, attack scaling DPS unit, and Yugo would be one of them, but as already said, she's kind of an exception. So those are units like White, for example, close range DPS unit, Jinsung, Evankel. She's a stall tank, so we're not really going to consider her. We have Princess of the Heart, also a close range DPS unit. Most of them are exceptions, to be honest, but okay. In general, if your DPS is close range, you still want to go with a resistance build. The best example of this would be White. I definitely recommend if you are below 300 deficit to go a resistance build on White because it will still deal damage. He has a lot of magic resistance shredded in his kit. He has magic pierce. He has a lot of stuff, and you don't really need to overdo it with damage. It will still deal enough to kill the enemies. But if you go resistances, he has a lot of shields that are super like they're pretty big, and his durability will be a lot better. You won't struggle as much. Like you will not see your white just disappearing from the fight because it got one-shotted. That will not happen. But it will definitely not deal enough damage as you get closer to 300 deficit. Once you go above it, his damage will really start to suck. You want to go with a full damage build, but then his durability is complete garbage. So that's kind of up to you, but white is not a unit that is used above 350 most of the time. So you can still use him, but it's annoying too. So yeah, just an example. So for below 300 deficit, slot 4 magic resistance is my recommendation for the main stat, and slot 5 physical resistance. I will go through what are some important thresholds for some specific stats in a table below. So we're not going to talk about this part here in the notes, the 99% resistance threshold. It doesn't, like, it matters, but we're not going to talk about that now. In terms of substats, you would definitely want to look for items that have magic resistance, physical resistance, just to reach that threshold. And then we have magic or physical pierce, depending on the type of your unit. And you find that here, it's the icon in the middle. In this case, white deals magic damage for some reason. So yeah, that's only one of the two. There is no unit that deals hybrid damage. It's either physical or magic. So only build the one that you need. Then we have critical hit damage and critical hit rate. Obviously, if a unit already has critical hit rate in the Revolution substats, you don't need to focus too much on that. And to be honest, effect resistance could also be considered a bit more important. It's definitely for tanks, but also for close range DPS units, because effect resistance also protects from debuffs. And if an enemy has like a resistance decrease, you definitely want to block that, because if it hits you, then your DPS might explode. That's also really important to consider. And accuracy if you don't have enough. That's kind of what you can build below 300 deficit. Above 300, if you don't have a lot of evasion in your archive, then you definitely want to go crit damage or effect resistance or effect hit in slot 4 main stat. These will depend on a unit. As we said before, for Hugo, you want to go effect resistance. For a unit like white, you might want to go just crit damage increase. That's good enough. If you have a DPS unit that has very important crowd controls or debuffs, like, okay, it's not the case because it's not close range, but like, for example, Revolution Bomb, he has a very important defense decrease and also swiftness decrease, and he has a lot of like crowd controls. So he definitely wants some effect hit as well. He's a mage, so he's yet another exception. Mages have effect hit in the Revolution subnodes, and that's more than enough for adventure and PvE purposes. So yeah, normally the order of priority would be crit damage, but if the unit really needs it, effect resistance. Effect it, a bit too niche, don't think about it. Then slot 5, magic on physical or physical pierce. And for the substats, we don't look for resistance anymore. Obviously, they don't work, so why bother? And we go magic or physical pierce, crit damage, crit rate, effect hit, effect resistance. Basically the same as before. And yeah, that's it. I also had the node for mage and assassin that you don't have to look for critical hit rate, stuff like that, and also the note about Hugo. If you have a lot of evasion, at this point you might prioritize some evasion. More important than crit damage, I would say, but less than pierce. Kind of depends, but that's generally how we'll go about it. For the main stats is exactly the same as before, so we're not even going to talk about that. And normally a good piece would have pierce, double crit, and evasion. Instead of crit rate, again, if it's a mage or an assassin, just go for effect hit or effect resistance. It's probably better. Or accuracy, it's okay. So that's it for attack scaling DPS units. For attack scaling DPS units that are ranged, then you just go full offensive. Like in this case, this would be Revolution Bomb. And my Revolution Bomb, for example, has crit damage. Don't look at the substats, they are just trash on mine. But okay, Magic Pierce, also this one kind of trash. So, most important, crit damage increase. You don't really go effect resistance or range DPS, I would say, is kind of unusual, so I would not recommend it. You could go affect it, as I was saying before, but normally you just go crit damage, because again, units that normally need it will have it in Revolution. I cannot even show it here. Oh, no, okay, it's here. My bad. If you go here, Revolution, a mage will have affect it here. So if I need it, I will just unlock it and level it up a little bit. Just enough to have it higher than the enemy effect resistance. And then for substats, just go full offensive, and then as needed, affect hit, effect resistance, or accuracy. Kind of the same notes as before. I added some for like Kaiser or Lightning Spear Machini that you could run resistances instead. There are some DPS units like this one that I just mentioned, or Kaiser. I have one here that I run with resistance builds. The main reason for this is that their survivability is garbage. A unit like Revolution Bomb has insane survivability, but units like Kaiser and Lightning Spear Kunmashini have whole full survivability. And to make team building easier, especially when you don't have a lot of supporting options, going full resistance is quite good. So my Kaiser now has a lot less issues surviving. She will still die if she's hard focused, but she can resist the occasional hits. She will not explode in one hit. And her damage is still crazy high. For both Kaiser and Mashini, they have insane damage even with a resistance build. So it's not a problem. You can definitely do it below 300 deaths. Above, obviously, it doesn't make any sense anymore. You're still getting one-shotted. So yeah, that's more or less it. And for the above 300, it's again full offensive, nothing else. As you can see, it's basically the same. Actually, what did it even change? I think absolutely nothing. Is just that the width of the column is a bit narrower or something. But okay, so that's exactly the same. For high evasion, there's just evasion that appears as an option. That's it. There's literally nothing else to say. I also try to place these stats in order of priority. So if you see that you have a piece with the first 3 stats and then the last one, that's a really good piece. If you only have the first one and then effect hit, effect resistance, and accuracy, that's a bit worse, but still workable, I'd say, but it's not really a piece you want. I mean, you can still get away with it. You just want 5 upgrades on peers, but okay, it doesn't matter. So there are some variations. That's just a generic overview. And yeah, then we have the next category, that is the max HP scaling DPS. These is basically full defensive stats. Below 300 deficit, you go full resistances. You don't care, again, about crit. You don't care about pierce. You don't care about anything. Just go resistances. Just go effect resistance. Effect it if needed. Accuracy and evasion if needed. And that's it. Then if you are above 300 deficit, you can go slot 4 effect resistance or effect hit. Up to you based on the unit's kit. And slot 5 doesn't matter. There is nothing really good that you can roll there. You can go physical resistance anyway, or you can just ignore it, and that's it. So a lot easier to build, a lot cheaper. You don't really care about stats at all. And the same, even if there is evasion into the picture, you just prioritize that, and that's it. So very, very basic and simple. Then we have stall tanks. They're also pretty basic, even though I added some more stats. I added magic resistance and physical resistance. Even though there are some exceptions to this rule, like the most typical stall tank that you can think of when you think of one, that is Data Kunmashini, you will basically never go resistances on her. You just go full effect resistance on slot 4, and that's it. You can go damage if you have an invested Kunmashini, but like this one, you don't care. I didn't even unlock the carrier user all the time. I did not even bother to unlock the carrier for ignition weapons. So yeah, this is just to say that some stall tanks don't need anything at all. You could do it. I could just throw a Bari set on her without any upgrades and it would be fine. But if you have another stall tank, like for example, the other one that usually comes to mind that I Do I have it? I should have it. I was looking for that at Zahard, but apparently I don't have him. So we're going to go with Adventure at Zahard, is the same guy. In this case, you can go with a full resistance build and it will be quite good and definitely will extend its durability. So definitely do that. But for most of the others, you can just go without any pieces at all and you're fine. Then we have above 300 deficit. So when resistances don't work anymore, you just go effect resistance slot 4 and slot 5 is again irrelevant. You don't really care. And the substats, just effect resistance affected, accuracy, that's it. But really don't invest on stall tanks. They can survive, rely just on their kit. So that's okay. And if you also have high evasion, just add evasion in the substats priority. But again, don't invest on stall tanks. It's unnecessary. Then we have the next category, so utility tanks. And in this case, we go full all in resistances when you are below 300 deficits. And to be honest, also when you're above, but we're going to talk about that in a second. In terms of substats, is pretty much the same as before, but you only care about resistances, effect resistance, defense percent. That's pretty important as well. Not as much as the other, but definitely a stat you want. Effect hit is also really important so that you can land your debuffs and your status effects that you most likely have. And accuracy, because it's needed, otherwise you're not going to land anything anyway. So yeah, that's all. We're going to talk about again the threshold for resistances later. For now, we can just move on to the next one. And that is, even if you are above 300 deficit, normally some tanks have ways to reduce the damage taken, whether it is through defensive buffs, so they have a maybe 300% defense increase. That's good enough to extend how long resistance are going to work for that unit. That's good, like a Karaka or Yama or stuff like that, or Data Urek, whatever. And some units might also have damage reduction, damage taken reduction, like Awakened Drak, Kunran, even though Kunran is an assassin, not a tank, but okay. So yeah, you get the idea. They have ways to make resistances work even at higher deficits. It won't be that much higher. Normally they will last probably 400, 450 if you're really pushing it. But yeah, they have ways to improve that. So you can stick to it even above 300. It is fine. And you don't really have better option. The alternative would just be to follow the stall tank variant and it'll be okay. And if there is evasion into the picture as well, then definitely throw something in there as well. So you go magic resistance, physical resistance, evasion as your priorities, and then you also add effect resistance, effect hit, and stuff like that. So that's all for utility tanks. Pretty basic as well. For support units, if they are debuffer or crowd controllers, you want to go with the resistances if it's below 300. And immediately after resistance, you want to prioritize effect hit before you go with effect resistance and stuff like that. Mainly because support units have effect resistance in the Revolution subnode, so they can get some of it already, and it's not too important. But yeah, definitely effect hit is an important stat to have. If you are above 300, similar to the other ones, effect hit becomes a bit more important in this case because you want to land stuff. So instead of going effect resistance, that would be the priority. So again, slot 4, effect hit, pretty good. Slot 5, irrelevant again. Really, there is nothing to do there. In substats, priority effect hit, then accuracy, then effect resistance. If you have a lot of evasion in the archive, then archive becomes the priority in the substats, and that's as simple as that. For supports that are only buffer, this is similar but a bit different. So for the below 300, it's basically the same, just swapping the priority of effect resistance and effect hit. You just want to go with pure effect resistance so that you're not interrupted, you're not stunned, you're not anything, and you can do your thing. So that's important. Then for the above 300 deficit, when resistances don't work, you just go effect resistance, slot 4, and that's it. As simple as that. I also added attack percent in this case as an additional stat. I could have done probably the same also for the buffer and crowd controllers, but I only did it for buffers because in this category I would put a unit like Albelda for the most part, and she has a attack buff to your DPS based off of how much attack she has. So having some attack rolls is not too bad. And yeah, that's why you also see attack listed there. But yeah, I think there is nothing more to add. As you can see, it's pretty simple and straightforward. There is really not much to it. Just try to get as many of these and try to reach some important thresholds. Talking about thresholds and some more detail on the stats, I added a table here with more details on each stat and why it is important and other things. So we have, again, the stat, why is it good, and when you should build it. So that's really, really important. For the first category, we have magic and physical resistance. They are obviously considered as one. And this is just allowing your units to survive multiple hits without dying. And an important note is that resistances are only effective up to 99%. So no matter how much resistances you have, or how many resistances you have, it will only be effective up to 99%. This does not mean that anything higher than that is irrelevant, because if the enemy has pierce or has a resistance debuff, then you will mitigate that with your overcapping resistance. If you have 140 and the enemy decreases the resistance by 40%, then it will go down to 100%, which is still effectively 99%. That's really, really important stuff to take into account. Another very important thing is that you should have 99% if you want to go resistances. You don't say, oh, I'm building resistances, but you only have like 95%. That's not good. 95%, it's 5 times the damage you would take on 99%. So you get the idea. If 99% resistances work at 300 deficit, 95% probably work at 150, maybe not even that. I don't know. But yeah, keep that in mind. You want 99% bare minimum. Okay, that's really, really important. And also, an additional information I added is that you could aim for 115% because there are some enemies starting from 470 that are Red Mask Warrior and regular Leroro that have a 16% pierce for the enemy team, which is insane. And if you have 115%, then you still have the 99% resistance. So that's quite good. It's not a huge deal most of the times, but it's something important to keep in mind. If you see your units randomly dying, you're wondering why, check if there is a Red Mask Warrior or regular Leroro in the enemy team. And when you should build this is when you are playing around 300 deficit or less. That's when you want to play resistances. For the next point, magic and physical pierce is just ignoring the enemy resistance. So if you have 50% pierce, you subtract 50% from the enemy's resistance. If they have 99%, they will go down to like 49%. As simple as that, straightforward. There is nothing much to say. I only added here that, okay, well, there are diminishing returns. That's pretty obvious. And also is not affecting max HP damage. That's another important thing. Then we have critical hit damage and critical hit rate. But yeah, it's basically allowing your hits to do additional damage. Crit damage, has many other games, is a multiplier. So that's straightforward. If you dealt, let's say, I don't know, 100 damage and you have a 50% crit damage, then you would deal 150. Now you cannot really only have 50% because we have a 50% hidden crit rate. So in my case, let's take my Albelda here. We see I have 41% crit damage. This is in fact 91% because there is a 50% that is not shown in the stats, but it's present in the damage formula when I tested it. So that's just how it is, and it's again only affecting attack percent scaling damage, not the HP percent one. And yeah, similarly, you want to build this one when your DPS scales with attack and they don't have critical hit rate in Revolution. And for crit damage, only when your DPS is, again, attack scaler and they try to build 100% crit rate in their builds. If they don't, then don't stress about it. You're really wasting slots for very minimal gains. Then we have effect resistance. This is a really important stat because it allows a unit to resist status effects and debuffs. And this stat needs to be higher than the enemy effect hit, or it will not have any effect. And we have an 80 effect resistance coming from Origin Orb. It's only the second half, so if you don't have that, then you are at 0. And a lot of units like supports, tanks, and warriors have it in the Revolution, so that's an important stat to have. Units in Adventure don't really have a lot of it. I think the current floor I'm at, maybe we can quickly check it. They don't really have a lot of it. Now it's lagging, but okay. We can click a unit here. They have 60%, sorry, not 60%, they have 60 resistance, 60 hit. So if I have like 100 effect resistance, that's at times enough to dodge some status effects and some debuffs. That's good enough. You get 220 from a main status.4, so that's plenty, that's really good. But yeah, just keep that in mind. And also effect hit, that is the other stat that we see here. That is exactly the opposite, like accuracy is to evasion. You need it higher than the enemy resistance so that it applies all the time. That's just as simple as that. And when to build it is when your units don't have status effects resistance, like in their own kit, or status effect immunity maybe in their own kits, or when they don't have the effect resistance in the Revolution, or when you definitely don't want them to get stunned because otherwise they're going to have a degraded performance. Like Hugo, if Hugo is stunned, she cannot refresh her shield. If Data Machine is stunned, she cannot cast skills to extend her immortality. So those kind of units definitely want effect resistance. And effect it, you build it when you have units that you want their debuffs to be applied or their status effects to be applied. So you definitely go for that stat as well. And then I have a section for accuracy and evasion. That's pretty simple. Accuracy determines whether your attack lands or not, and it just needs to be equal or higher than the enemy evasion. So if the enemy has 1000 evasion and you have 1000 accuracy, you will hit them all the time. If you have 999, you will start missing some attacks. As simple as that. Now it's more important probably to talk about evasion, because evasion is increasing the chance of dodging when you have higher than the enemy accuracy, but if it's just a little bit higher, it will be super inconsistent. Normally it is consistent enough at 200 above the enemy accuracy. That is not something that is easy to achieve. So let's go again here on a unit. We see that this guy has 1140 accuracy. If you look at my evasion on a random unit, let's take Reflejo, for example, I have, where's that, 691, which means if I go with my True Essence in full evasion, I should gain around maybe 350 from what I have now. Let's say I get to 1050, that's still not enough. Then let's say I go some pieces with evasion, I get an additional 150. For my pieces, I get to 1200. That's only 60 more than the enemy accuracy. It's not gonna matter at all. It's gonna be trash. So all of that effort for close to no results, that's not worth it. So you only go evasion when you can be well above 200 compared to the enemy accuracy. So if the enemy has 1000, you need at the very least 1200. But even then, as you start pushing more and more, enemies will have more accuracy and your evasion likely will not be able to keep up. Unless, again, you're a whale. If you're a whale, you get a lot of evasion from Archive, but that mostly comes from upgrading all Revolution subnodes of all SSR Plus units. Yeah, not something easy to achieve. So kind of my general recommendation is to forget about evasion. It's just not worth the time. And yeah, that's basically all, guys, for this guide. I'm sorry if it was a bit long. I'm also quite sure it's still a bit too messy. I did not really manage to explain it clearly. But let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Just feel free to read through. Let me know if there is anything that you think should be adjusted, and I will definitely do so. Again, thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.